The white lace of Delilah Foster's wedding dress had turned gray with dust by the time the third dawn broke over Winnemucca, Nevada. And still she sat on that hard wooden bench outside the train station, waiting for a groom who would never come. She had arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late August of 1882, stepping off the Central Pacific Railroad with nothing but a carpet bag, her wedding dress already on, and a telegram clutched in her trembling hand that promised a man named Robert Sullivan would be waiting to marry her. The station master, a portly man with kind eyes named Mr. Henderson, had watched her scan the sparse crowd with growing concern, her hopeful smile fading like sunset into darkness. No one had come forward. No one had claimed her. That first night, Mr. Henderson had offered her his office to sleep in, but Delilah had refused. She would wait outside, she insisted, because surely Robert had just been delayed. Perhaps his wagon had broken down on the road from his ranch. Perhaps he had fallen ill but would recover by morning. She could not bear the thought of him arriving to find her gone, thinking she had abandoned him instead. Mr. Henderson had brought her a blanket and a cup of weak coffee, shaking his head with the weariness of a man who had seen too many disappointed mail-order brides pass through his station. The second day brought scorching heat that made her throat raw and her lips crack. Other travelers came and went, casting curious glances at the young woman in the wilted wedding dress, who sat so still she might have been a statue. A few kind souls offered her water or bread, which she accepted with quiet gratitude, but she spoke little. What was there to say? That she had sold everything she owned in Philadelphia to buy a train ticket west. That her parents were dead, and her only brother had married a woman who made clear there was no room for Delilah in their small home. That she had answered Robert Sullivan's advertisement in the matrimonial newspaper with desperate hope, and his letters back had been kind enough to make her believe in second chances. The station master's wife, Clara Henderson, came by that afternoon with a basket of food and a gentle suggestion that perhaps Delilah should send a telegram to Mr. Sullivan's ranch, or at least come stay at their home until matters could be sorted out. But Delilah had no money left for telegrams, and something stubborn in her refused to leave that bench. If she left, it would make it real. It would mean accepting that she had been abandoned, that the promises in those letters had been lies, that she was utterly alone in a strange western town with no prospects and no future. By the third day, Delilah had stopped crying. Her tears had dried up along with her hopes, leaving behind a hollow numbness that felt almost like peace. She watched the sun climb slowly into the Nevada sky, painting the dusty street gold and amber, and wondered distantly what she would do when night fell again. She could not sit on this bench forever, though part of her wanted to simply fade away like morning mist, to disappear rather than face the humiliation and despair of her situation. The morning train arrived with its usual commotion of steam and grinding metal, disgorging a handful of passengers who hurried about their business. Delilah barely looked up. She was studying her hands, noting how sunburned they had become, when a shadow fell across her lap. She assumed it was Mrs. Henderson again, and prepared to offer the same polite refusals, but the voice that spoke was deep and masculine, rough as gravel but somehow gentle. "Excuse me, miss. I have been searching for you." Delilah's head snapped up, her heart leaping with irrational hope that perhaps Robert had come after all, but the man standing before her was no one she had ever seen before. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work and a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were a startling blue beneath the brim of his dusty hat, and a scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a roguish appearance despite the concern in his expression. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, His boots scuffed, and his shirt faded from many washings. "You have been searching for me," Delilah repeated, her voice hoarse from 3 days of sparse conversation. "I do not understand. I am waiting for someone else." The cowboy removed his hat, revealing dark hair that needed cutting. He held the hat against his chest in a gesture of respect that seemed automatic. "My name is Xavier Donovan, madam. I rode into town to inquire about a mail-order bride that was supposed to arrive for Bob Sullivan. I am afraid I have some difficult news to deliver." Delilah felt her stomach drop. She gripped the edge of the bench, her knuckles white. "What news?" Xavier's jaw tightened, and she could see he was choosing his words carefully. "Bob Sullivan died 2 weeks ago. Snake bite out on the range. He was dead before anyone could get him to a doctor. I am his ranch foreman, or I was. We did not know about you until yesterday when I was going through his papers, settling his affairs. I found your letters and realized you might already be on your way. I came as quick as I could." The words washed over Delilah like cold water, and she felt herself swaying on the bench. Dead. Robert Sullivan was dead, had been dead even before she left Philadelphia, dead while she had been sitting on a train daydreaming about her new life. It was so absurd, so impossibly cruel that she might have laughed if she could remember how. "I see," she managed to say, though she did not see at all. Nothing made sense. The world had become strange and unfamiliar, full of sharp edges and false promises. Xavier sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. He had kind eyes, she noticed through her fog of shock, and he seemed genuinely distressed by the news he had delivered. "Madam, I know this is a terrible situation. Bob was a good man, one of the best I have known. He talked about you in those last days, said he was looking forward to having a wife, to not being alone anymore. I think he would be sick about this, about you coming all this way for nothing." "For nothing," Delilah echoed. The words tasted bitter. "I did not mean it like that," Xavier said quickly. He twisted his hat in his hands, clearly uncomfortable. "What I meant was, you should not have had to go through this. It is not right." They sat in silence for a moment, watching a tumbleweed blow down the dusty street. Delilah tried to organize her thoughts, to figure out what she should do next, but everything felt overwhelming. She had no money, no family, no prospects. She could not even afford a ticket back to Philadelphia, not that she had anything to return to. "Where will you go?" Xavier asked quietly. "I do not know," Delilah admitted. "I have no money for travel. I suppose I will need to find work here in Winnemucca if anyone will hire me." She looked down at her ruined wedding dress with something like despair. "Though I imagine I do not look very employable at the moment." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, and when Delilah glanced at him, she found him studying her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. She knew she must look dreadful after 3 days outside in the heat and dust, her dark blonde hair escaping its pins, her face surely red from sun exposure. "I have a proposition," Xavier said finally. "It might sound strange, but hear me out before you refuse." Delilah turned to face him more fully. She had nothing to lose by listening. "Go on." "Bob's ranch. It passes to his sister back in Missouri. She has already sent word that she wants nothing to do with it, that she will sell it to me if I can come up with the money. I have been saving my wages for years, and I almost have enough, but the bank will not give me a loan for the rest because I am not married. They say a single man is too much of a risk, that I might gamble it away or run off." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "You came here to marry Bob and start a new life. The ranch still exists, the life still exists, it just needs 2 people to make it work." Delilah stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "Are you asking me to marry you? You do not even know me." "I know you have courage," Xavier said. You came all the way from back east to marry a man you had never met, to start over in a hard land. I know you are loyal, because you sat on this bench for 3 days waiting, even when you might have given up. I know you are strong, because you are still sitting here talking to me instead of falling apart, though you would have every right to. He took a breath. I am not asking for a love match, madam. I am offering a partnership. You need security and a home. I need a wife to secure the ranch loan. We could help each other. It was insane. Delilah knew it was insane. She had known this man for all of 10 minutes, and he was proposing marriage as casually as if he were offering to buy her lunch. And yet, what other options did she have? She could try to find work in town, perhaps as a laundress or a cook, but jobs were scarce and competition was fierce. She would likely end up in a saloon, serving drinks to rough men or worse. At least Xavier Donovan seemed respectful. At least he was offering her a legitimate way forward. Would you expect me to be a proper wife? She asked, needing to understand the full nature of his proposition. Her cheeks flushed at the implication, but she had to know. Xavier's own face colored slightly, but he held her gaze. I would expect you to help run the household, to cook and manage the house as you are able. As for the rest, that would be up to you in time. I would not force anything. You would have your own room, your own space. If affection grew between us, well, that would be a blessing. But I would not demand it. Why are you doing this? Delilah asked. You could find another woman, someone local who knows ranch life. I do not have time, Xavier said bluntly. The bank wants an answer within the week and Bob's sister wants to sell quickly. Finding a woman, courting her, convincing her to marry me, that could take months I do not have. And besides, he added, his voice softening, you are already here. You already made the decision to start a new life. I am just offering you a chance to still have it. Delilah looked away, her mind racing. It was crazy and impulsive and completely reckless. But then again, coming to Nevada to marry a stranger had been all those things too. At least this way, she would have a home and security. She would not be dependent on the charity of others or forced into desperate circumstances. And Xavier seemed kind, which was more than many women could say about their husbands. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, Xavier stood, settling his hat back on his head. I am staying at the Silver Star Hotel tonight. Come find me when you have decided. But madam, I will be heading back to the ranch tomorrow afternoon with or without an answer. The work does not wait. He tipped his hat to her and walked away, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Delilah watched him go, her mind spinning with the sudden turn her life had taken. For 3 days, she had been frozen in grief and shock, but now she felt the ice cracking, possibility seeping in through the fissures. Mrs. Henderson appeared at her elbow as if summoned by telepathy, her round face creased with concern. I saw you talking to that cowboy. Is everything all right, dear? I am not sure, Delilah admitted. Mrs. Henderson, what do you know about Xavier Donovan? The older woman's face brightened slightly. Xavier. Oh, he is a good man, dear. Been working for Bob Sullivan for near about 5 years. Hard worker, honest, does not drink or gamble like so many of the hands. He helped my husband fix our barn roof last winter, would not take any payment for it. Why do you ask? Delilah hesitated, then decided she needed advice from someone, and Mrs. Henderson had been nothing but kind. He has asked me to marry him. A marriage of convenience to help him buy Bob Sullivan's ranch. Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline, but to her credit, she did not immediately dismiss the idea as insane. Instead, she settled herself on the bench beside Delilah and took her hand. That is quite an offer. What are you thinking? I am thinking I have very few choices, Delilah said honestly. I cannot go back to Philadelphia. I have no money to go anywhere else. Finding work here will be difficult, and I have no place to stay while I look. Xavier is offering me a home and security, and he seems kind enough. But it feels so reckless, marrying another stranger. Life out here is reckless, dear, Mrs. Henderson said gently. Most of us came west taking big chances on uncertain futures. I married Mr. Henderson after knowing him for 2 weeks, and that was 30 years ago. We have made a good life. She paused, squeezing Delilah's hand. But you need to trust your instincts. If something feels wrong about this man, do not do it. There are other ways forward, even if they are harder. Delilah closed her eyes, trying to listen to whatever instincts she possessed. Xavier had looked her in the eye when he spoke. He had been honest about why he needed a wife. He had not tried to touch her inappropriately or make demands. He had given her time to decide. These were all good signs, were they not? I think I am going to accept, she heard herself say, and realized it was true. I think this is the best path forward, strange as it is. Mrs. Henderson smiled and patted her hand. Then you will need a bath and some proper clothes. You cannot marry the man in a ruined wedding dress meant for someone else. Come home with me. We will get you sorted out. The kindness nearly broke through Delilah's careful composure, but she managed to hold herself together as she followed Mrs. Henderson to a modest house at the edge of town. The bath was hot and glorious, washing away 3 days of dust and despair. Mrs. Henderson provided a simple but clean dress in a practical blue cotton and helped Delilah brush out her hair and pin it up neatly. Looking at herself in the mirror, Delilah saw a stranger, someone harder than the girl who had left Philadelphia. Perhaps that was good. Hard people survived out here. She found Xavier at the Silver Star Hotel just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He was sitting in the lobby, cleaning his rifle, but he stood immediately when he saw her, setting the weapon aside. "Miss Foster," he said, and she could hear the question in his voice. "My answer is yes," Delilah said, lifting her chin. "I will marry you, Mr. Donovan." "When did you want to proceed?" Relief flooded Xavier's face, and his smile transformed him from merely handsome to genuinely attractive. "Tomorrow morning, if you are willing. There is a preacher here in town, and we can have the ceremony at the church. Simple and quick, then we can head to the ranch and start settling in before winter comes." "Tomorrow morning is fine," Delilah agreed, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. This was really happening. She was really going to marry this man. "I want you to have this," Xavier said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a simple gold band, slightly worn. "It was my mother's ring. She passed 5 years ago, but she would have wanted it to go to my wife. I know this is not a conventional situation, but I want to do things properly." Delilah took the ring, feeling its weight in her palm. It made everything feel more real, more solid. "Thank you. I will wear it with honor." "Get some rest tonight," Xavier said. "Tomorrow starts our new life." Delilah spent the night at the Henderson house, lying awake in their spare room and staring at the ceiling. She tried to imagine what her life would be like on the ranch, but she knew so little about ranching or Western life that her imagination failed her. She had grown up in a city, working as a seamstress until her eyes could barely handle the close work anymore. She knew nothing about cooking over a wood stove or dealing with livestock or any of the 100 tasks that must make up ranch life. But she would learn. She had to. The wedding the next morning was brief and businesslike, held in a small white church with only Mr. and Mrs. Henderson as witnesses. The preacher, a young man with nervous hands, rushed through the ceremony as if afraid one of them might change their minds midway. Xavier repeated his vows in a strong, clear voice, and when it was Delilah's turn, she was surprised to find her own voice steady. She meant the words, or at least, She meant to try her best to honor them. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier hesitated, then leaned forward to brush a chaste kiss across Delilah's cheek. His lips were warm and slightly chapped, and the gentleness of the gesture made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. "Mrs. Donovan," he said quietly, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost like wonder. They signed the marriage certificate, Xavier's handwriting neat and careful, and then it was done. Delilah Foster had ceased to exist, replaced by Delilah Donovan, wife to a cowboy she had known for less than a day. It should have been terrifying, and perhaps it was, but underneath the fear was something else. Hope, maybe, or simply relief that she was no longer alone. Xavier had a wagon waiting outside, loaded with supplies he had purchased in town. He helped Delilah up onto the seat beside him with careful courtesy, making sure she was settled before climbing up himself. The ranch was about an hour's ride north of Winnemucca, he explained, nestled in a valley with good water and decent grazing. As they rode out of town, Delilah took one last look at the train station where she had spent 3 of the worst days of her life. It already felt like it had happened to someone else, like a story she had heard rather than lived. She turned to face forward, toward whatever future awaited her. The landscape was harsh but beautiful in its own way, all golden grass and distant mountains under an impossibly blue sky. Xavier drove the wagon with easy competence, occasionally pointing out landmarks or explaining something about the area. He seemed more relaxed away from town, more in his element, and Delilah found herself relaxing too, lulled by the rhythmic creak of the wagon and the warmth of the sun. "Tell me about yourself," Xavier said after they had been riding for a while. "I know so little about you, and we should probably try to fix that." Delilah was not sure where to begin. Her life before Nevada seemed gray and distant now. "I am 22 years old. I grew up in Philadelphia, where my father was a clerk and my mother took in sewing. They both died of influenza 3 years ago within days of each other. My brother, Daniel, is 4 years older than me. He married a woman named Margaret who never liked me much. After our parents died, it became clear I should find other arrangements." She paused, remembering the uncomfortable conversations, the sense of being unwelcome in what had been her childhood home. "I worked as a seamstress until my eyesight began to suffer from the close work. When I saw Bob Sullivan's advertisement, it seemed like a chance for something better, a new start." "I am sorry about your parents," Xavier said quietly, "and sorry your brother's wife was not kinder." "What about you?" Delilah asked, wanting to shift the focus away from her own sad history. "Tell me your story." Xavier was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. "I am 27. I grew up on a small farm in Ohio, youngest of 6 children. My father drank too much and my mother worked herself to death trying to hold everything together. When I was 17, I headed west looking for better opportunities. I have worked cattle drives, been a ranch hand, tried my luck at mining for a while, though that did not suit me. 5 years ago, I hired on with Bob Sullivan, and he taught me everything about running a ranch properly. He was like a father to me, better than my own ever was." His voice roughened slightly. "I want to make the ranch succeed, partly for myself, but partly for Bob's memory too. He believed in me. I want to prove he was right to do so." There was something deeply honest in Xavier's words, and Delilah felt a stirring of respect for this man she had married. He had dreams and loyalty and determination. These were good qualities, ones that suggested their partnership might actually work. The ranch, when they finally arrived, was both more and less than Delilah had imagined. The house itself was modest, a sturdy structure of wood and stone with a covered porch and shuttered windows. There was a barn and several outbuildings, corrals, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing across the valley. It was isolated, the nearest neighbor several miles away, but there was something peaceful about it too, a sense of space and possibility. Xavier helped her down from the wagon, and she noticed his hands were calloused but gentle. "Welcome home," he said, and there was something tentative in his expression, as if he was worried she might find it lacking. "It is lovely," Delilah said honestly. Compared to the cramped boarding house she had been living in back in Philadelphia, this felt like a palace. Inside, the house was clean but sparse, clearly the home of a bachelor. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a few simple chairs. There were 2 bedrooms off the main room, and Xavier immediately showed her to the larger one. "This was Bob's room, but you should have it. It has the better window and more space. I will take the smaller room." He set her carpetbag down on the bed, which was covered with a faded quilt. "I know it is not fancy, but you can fix it up however you like. If you need things, fabric or supplies or anything, we can get them next time we go to town." "It is fine," Delilah assured him, though she was mentally cataloging all the improvements that could be made. Curtains for the window, rugs for the floors, perhaps some cushions for those hard chairs. "Thank you for giving me the better room. We should probably establish some routines," Xavier said, looking slightly uncomfortable again. "I usually wake before dawn to start the chores. The cattle need checking, horses need tending, always something that needs fixing or building. I can make basic meals for myself, but I will not pretend I am any good at it. If you could handle cooking, that would be helpful. There is a root cellar out back with supplies and chickens for eggs. I can teach you what needs doing around the house and property." "I am not afraid of hard work," Delilah said. "Though I confess I know nothing about ranching, you will need to be patient with me while I learn." Xavier's smile was warm. "I can be patient, and you will learn fast. This life has a way of teaching quickly." They spent the rest of the afternoon with Xavier showing Delilah around the property, introducing her to the handful of horses in the barn, showing her the chicken coop and the root cellar and the well. There was so much to remember, so much that was foreign to her, but she tried to absorb it all. The chickens were suspicious of her, clucking and fluttering when she approached, but Xavier showed her how to move slowly and calmly, how to gather eggs without startling them too much. As the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, Xavier taught Delilah how to work the wood stove in the kitchen. It was more complicated than she had expected, getting the temperature right, learning to read the signs of heat. She burned the first pan of biscuits to charcoal, but the second attempt was more successful, and they ate dinner together at the rough table. Along with some beans Xavier had prepared and coffee so strong it made Delilah's eyes water. "Tomorrow, I will ride out to check the cattle," Xavier said over dinner. "It will take most of the day. You can spend time settling in, getting comfortable with the house and the immediate area. Do not wander too far on your own until you know the land better. It is easy to get turned around." "I will stay close," Delilah promised. The idea of being alone in this vast landscape was daunting, but she supposed she would need to get used to it. After dinner, Xavier insisted on cleaning up, saying she had worked hard enough for her first day. Delilah did not argue, grateful for the chance to sit and process everything that had happened. She was married. She was on a ranch in Nevada. Her entire life had changed in less than 24 hours. When darkness fell fully, Xavier lit a lantern and showed her how to bank the fire in the stove so it would last through the night without being dangerous. Then he walked her to her bedroom door with awkward courtesy. "Sleep well, Delilah," he said, using her first name for what might have been the first time. If you need anything in the night, I am just across the way. Thank you, Xavier, for everything. He nodded and retreated to his own room, closing the door quietly behind him. Delilah changed into her nightgown, one of the few possessions she had brought from Philadelphia, and climbed into the bed. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable, stuffed with what felt like feathers, and the quilt was warm against the cooling night air. She lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through grass, the creak of the house settling. She was married to a stranger, living in an unfamiliar place with no idea what her future would hold. But for the first time since she had left Philadelphia, Delilah felt something other than despair. She felt cautiously hopeful. Xavier seemed kind and honest. The ranch was solid and real. She had work to do and a purpose. It was not the romantic dream she had imagined when she first answered Bob Sullivan's advertisement, but perhaps it could be something better. Something built on mutual respect and partnership rather than fantasy. With that thought, Delilah closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that was both challenging and surprisingly satisfying. Delilah woke each morning to find Xavier already gone to his work, and she would start the fire in the stove and prepare breakfast, learning through trial and error what worked and what did not. Xavier was patient with her mistakes, eating charred bacon and lumpy porridge without complaint, though she could see his relief when her cooking gradually improved. She learned to manage the chickens, who became less suspicious of her with time. She learned to work the butter churn, to preserve vegetables, to bake bread that rose properly instead of turning into dense bricks. The physical work was exhausting, so different from the sedentary life of a seamstress, but she found she enjoyed it in a way she had not expected. There was satisfaction in mastering new skills, in seeing tangible results from her efforts. Xavier, for his part, was respectful and considerate, always courteous, never pressing beyond the boundaries they had established. They were like cordial roommates more than husband and wife, working together toward common goals but maintaining careful distance. He complimented her cooking when it was good, helped her with tasks that required more strength than she possessed, and answered her endless questions about ranch life with patient thoroughness. But there was something else too, something Delilah was almost afraid to acknowledge. She found herself noticing things about Xavier, small details that seemed to accumulate despite her best efforts to remain detached. The way he was gentle with the horses, murmuring to them in a low voice that made them calm. The smile that occasionally broke through his serious expression, transforming his whole face. The strength in his hands, the competence with which he handled every task. The way he sometimes watched her when he thought she was not looking, something soft and wondering in his eyes. It confused her, these observations, because she had not expected to feel anything beyond gratitude and perhaps friendship toward this man. The marriage was supposed to be practical, convenient, a business arrangement. But feelings, she was discovering, did not care much about arrangements. One evening about a month after their marriage, a storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing lightning that split the sky and thunder that shook the house. Delilah had never experienced a storm quite like it, the sheer violence of nature unleashed, and she found herself genuinely frightened as wind howled around the house and rain hammered the roof like bullets. Xavier found her standing by the window, watching the lightning with wide eyes. "These storms can be fierce," he said, coming to stand beside her. "But the house is solid. We will be fine." "I have never seen anything like it," Delilah admitted. "In Philadelphia, storms were just rain. This feels alive, angry. It can seem that way," Xavier agreed. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face in stark white light. When I first came west, I was scared of these storms too. Now I find them kind of beautiful in a fierce way." They stood together watching the storm's fury, and Delilah was acutely aware of Xavier's presence beside her, the warmth radiating from him, the solid reassurance of him. When thunder cracked so loud it made her jump, Xavier's hand came to rest gently on her shoulder, steadying her. "You are safe," he said quietly. "I promise." Delilah turned to look at him, and in the next flash of lightning she saw something in his face that made her heart skip. He was looking at her not with the careful courtesy he usually maintained, but with something rawer, more vulnerable. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, really kiss her, but then the moment passed and he stepped back, his hand dropping from her shoulder. "I should check the barn, make sure the horses are not too spooked," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Stay inside." He left before she could respond, disappearing into the storm with just his oilskin coat for protection. Delilah watched from the window as he crossed the yard, leaning into the wind, and felt a strange ache in her chest. When had she started caring for this man beyond the practical terms of their arrangement? When had he become more than just a solution to her problems? The answer, she realized, was that it had been happening all along in small increments, building like sediment into something solid and real. She cared about Xavier Donovan, more than cared if she was honest with herself. She was starting to fall in love with her husband, this kind, hard-working man who had rescued her from despair and asked for nothing in return except partnership. The question was, did he feel anything for her beyond appreciation for her help around the ranch? And if he did, what should she do about it? Xavier returned from the barn soaked through, his dark hair plastered to his head and water dripping from his clothes. Delilah immediately went into action, fetching towels and stoking the fire higher, scolding him for going out in such weather even as she helped him peel off his wet coat. "You will catch your death," she said, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "The horses were panicking," Xavier said, his teeth chattering slightly. "I had to calm them down." "At least change into dry clothes before you freeze," Delilah ordered, and Xavier smiled at her bossiness but obeyed, retreating to his room to change. When he emerged in dry clothes with his hair roughly toweled, Delilah had hot coffee ready and had pulled one of the chairs closer to the fire. She pressed the coffee into his hands and made him sit, fussing over him in a way that felt natural even though they had been married barely a month. "Thank you," Xavier said, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. The storm was beginning to pass, the thunder growing more distant. "You are a good wife, Delilah." The words were simple, but something in his tone made Delilah's breath catch. She sat down in the other chair, tucking her skirts around her legs. "You are a good husband," she said quietly, "better than I expected if I am honest." Xavier looked at her over the rim of his cup. "What did you expect?" "I do not know. Someone harsh, perhaps, or demanding. Someone who saw me as just a means to an end. But you have been nothing but kind." "You make it easy," Xavier said. "You work hard, you never complain, you have made this house into a home. I am grateful every day that I found you at that station." "I am grateful you found me too," Delilah admitted. "I do not know what would have become of me otherwise." They fell into comfortable silence, listening to the fire crackle and the rain fade to a gentle patter. Delilah felt something shifting between them, some barrier beginning to dissolve. Perhaps it was time to be brave, to reach for something more than the careful distance they had maintained. "Xavier," she began, then hesitated, losing her nerve. "Yes, never mind. It is late. We should get some rest." Xavier looked like he wanted to press, but he just nodded. "Sleep well, Delilah." As she lay in bed that night, Delilah wondered if she had just made a mistake, if she should have been brave enough to speak her heart. But perhaps it was too soon. Perhaps Xavier was content with their arrangement as it was and did not want complications. She would wait, she decided. She would be patient and see what developed naturally. After all, they had time. They had a lifetime together theoretically. There was no need to rush, but the universe, it seemed, had other plans. 2 days later, Xavier rode out early to check the far pastures and did not return by dark. Delilah tried not to worry at first. He had warned her that sometimes the work took longer than expected, that he might not always make it back for dinner. But as the hours stretched and full darkness fell with no sign of him, anxiety began to gnaw at her. She kept the fire burning and food warm, going to the door every few minutes to peer out into the darkness. The night was moonless and still, the kind of darkness that felt absolute. She thought about saddling one of the horses and going to look for him, but Xavier's warnings about getting lost echoed in her mind. She was still too unfamiliar with the land to risk it. It was past midnight when she finally heard hoofbeats approaching. Delilah rushed to the door, relief flooding through her, but the relief turned to alarm when she saw Xavier slumped in the saddle, barely holding on. She ran to him as he dismounted, or rather, half fell from the horse. "Xavier, what happened?" "Horse stepped in a hole through me," Xavier said through gritted teeth. His face was pale and sheened with sweat. "I think I broke my arm, maybe some ribs too. I am sorry, took me a while to catch the horse and get back." Delilah helped him into the house, her heart pounding with fear. She had no medical training, no idea what to do for broken bones, but she had to try. She settled Xavier in his bed since it was closer, and lit every lamp she could find to give herself light to work by. "I need to see the damage," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Where does it hurt worst?" "Left arm, and my left side," Xavier managed. His breathing was shallow, and she could see he was in considerable pain. With careful hands, Delilah helped him remove his shirt, wincing at the bruises already blooming across his ribs and the odd angle of his forearm. She had seen broken bones before, back in Philadelphia, had helped her mother tend to a neighbor's child who had fallen from a fence. She knew the basics, at least. "The arm needs to be set," she said. "It is going to hurt." "Cannot hurt worse than it already does," Xavier said. But his attempt at humor was undermined by the pain in his eyes. Delilah found some straight pieces of wood in the barn that could serve as splints, and tore some old sheets into strips for binding. The actual setting of the bone was horrible, Xavier's muffled cries of pain cutting through her like knives, but she forced herself to be steady and thorough. She wrapped his ribs tightly, hoping that would help if they were indeed cracked, and made him drink some whiskey she found in a cabinet, hoping it would dull the pain at least a little. By the time she was done, they were both exhausted. Xavier's face was gray, and she could tell he was running a fever, his skin hot to the touch. "You need rest," she said, pulling a blanket over him. "I will stay here in case you need anything." "You do not have to," Xavier protested weakly. "Yes, I do," Delilah said firmly. She pulled the chair from the main room and settled herself beside his bed, prepared to watch over him through the night. Xavier's eyes were already drifting closed, exhaustion and pain pulling him under. "Delilah," he murmured. "Thank you. Hush now. Rest." Through the long night, Delilah kept vigil. Xavier's fever climbed, making him restless and delirious. She bathed his face with cool water, adjusted his blankets, gave him water when he would take it. He mumbled things in his fever, fragments that did not make much sense. But once she heard him say her name with such longing that it made her throat tight. By morning, the fever had broken and Xavier fell into a more natural sleep. Delilah, exhausted herself, dozed in the chair until the sound of him stirring woke her. "How do you feel?" she asked, moving to his side immediately. Like I was trampled by a dozen cattle, Xavier said, but his voice was stronger and his eyes clearer. But better than last night. You did a good job with the setting, thank you. You scared me, Delilah admitted. When you did not come home, I thought something terrible had happened. It could have been worse, Xavier said. I am just grateful I made it back. In the old days before you, I would have been on my own. I might not have survived. Well, you are not on your own anymore, Delilah said firmly, and you need to heal properly. That means staying in bed for at least a few days, maybe longer depending on your ribs. Xavier looked like he wanted to argue, but a deep breath that made him wince seemed to convince him she was right. Who will handle the ranch work? I will do what I can, Delilah said. I can feed the horses and chickens. The cattle will have to manage on their own for a few days. It is not ideal, but you are no good to anyone if you do not heal properly. Over the next week, their roles reversed. Delilah handled all the household work plus the outside chores she could manage, while Xavier chafed at being bedridden. She brought him meals, changed his bandages, read to him from an old book of poetry she found on a shelf. They talked more than they ever had before, long conversations about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. The careful distance they had maintained began to dissolve entirely. One afternoon, as Delilah was helping Xavier sit up to eat some soup, he caught her hand in his good one. Delilah, I need to say something. She looked at him, noting the serious expression on his face. What is it? This arrangement we made, this practical marriage, I do not think I can keep pretending it is just that anymore. He took a shaky breath. Somewhere along the way it became real for me. You became real for me. I have feelings for you, deep feelings, and I do not know how to contain them anymore. Delilah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. What kind of feelings? The kind where I think about you constantly when I am out working. The kind where your smile is the best part of my day. The kind where the idea of you leaving, of this not being real, terrifies me more than anything. He met her eyes, and she could see vulnerability and hope mingled there. I think I am falling in love with you, Delilah. Maybe I already have fallen. And I needed you to know, even if you do not feel the same way. For a moment, Delilah could not speak. Joy and relief and fear all tangled together in her chest, making it hard to breathe. Then she realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face, and Xavier looked alarmed. I am sorry, I should not have said anything. Please do not cry, he began, but Delilah cut him off. I am crying because I feel the same way, she said through her tears. I have been falling for you too, Xavier, but I was afraid to say anything. I thought you wanted to keep things practical, that you did not want complications. Xavier's face transformed, hope blooming into pure joy. You do, you really do. Yes, you foolish man, Delilah said, laughing and crying at the same time. I love you. I think I have been loving you for weeks now. I was just too scared to admit it. Xavier pulled her down with his good arm, bringing her face close to his. May I kiss you? Really kiss you, please, Delilah whispered. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape of each other's lips. But then it deepened, becoming something more passionate, more certain. Delilah felt like she was falling, but in the best possible way, like she was finally finding solid ground after floating untethered for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. That was worth the wait, Xavier said, grinning despite the pain that still lined his face. You need to heal quickly, Delilah said, her own smile matching his. So we can do that again, many times. Best motivation I have ever had, Xavier agreed. He did heal over the following weeks, slowly but surely, and as his body mended, their relationship deepened. They moved from careful partnership to genuine intimacy, learning each other not just as roommates but as lovers. Xavier was tender and patient, making sure Delilah felt safe and cherished. She, in turn, discovered a passionate side of herself she had not known existed, finding joy in physical intimacy when it was grounded in love and trust. The work of the ranch continued, harder with Xavier still recovering, but they managed together. Delilah learned to ride properly, gained confidence in handling the livestock, became adept at the 1,000 tasks that made up ranch life. When Xavier was well enough to ride again, she often joined him, and he showed her every corner of their property, sharing his knowledge and his dreams for the future. They went to the bank together and secured the loan they needed, the banker satisfied by their marriage certificate and their obvious commitment to making the ranch work. The property became officially theirs, the Sullivan Ranch transforming into the Donovan Ranch, though they kept Bob's name on a plaque by the door in honor of his memory. As autumn deepened and winter approached, they prepared together, storing food, reinforcing buildings, making sure the cattle had access to the valleys where winter grazing was possible. They worked side by side during the days and fell into each other's arms at night, building a life that felt richer and more real than anything Delilah had ever imagined. One evening in late November, as the first snow began to fall, they sat together by the fire, Delilah leaning back against Xavier's chest as he wrapped his arms around her. His left arm was still weaker than it had been, but functional, and the ribs had healed cleanly. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked quietly. "Marrying me instead of going back east or finding another path?" Delilah twisted to look at him. "Never, not even for a moment. Do you regret finding me at the station? Finding you was the best thing I ever did," Xavier said seriously. "I went to Winnemucca that day thinking I was offering you a practical solution to a problem. I had no idea I was finding the love of my life." "The love of your life," Delilah repeated, savoring the words. "I like that." "Get used to it," Xavier said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Because I plan to keep loving you for the rest of our lives." As winter settled over the ranch, Delilah and Xavier fell into a peaceful rhythm. The work was harder in the cold, but there was something cozy about coming inside to a warm house, about sitting together while the wind howled outside. They talked about the future, making plans for expanding the herd in spring, maybe building an addition onto the house eventually. Xavier taught Delilah to shoot, insisting she needed to know how to defend herself and the ranch when he was away in the far pastures. She proved to be a decent shot after some practice. Christmas was simple but perfect, just the two of them exchanging modest gifts by the fire. Xavier had carved her a small wooden horse, smooth and beautiful, and Delilah had sewn him a new shirt from fabric she had carefully saved money to buy on their last trip to town. They attended Christmas service in Winnemucca, and several people commented on how happy they looked together, what a good match they made. "Hard to believe you two have known each other less than half a year," Mrs. Henderson said, beaming at them. "You seem like you have been together forever." "It feels that way," Delilah agreed, smiling at Xavier across the church hall. He was talking to Mr. Henderson and some other ranchers, but he must have felt her gaze because he looked over and winked at her, making her heart flutter despite the months they had been together. That night, as they lay in bed together in the darkness, Xavier pulled her close. "I want to give you something," he said. "You already gave me the carving," Delilah protested. "Something else, something more important." He paused, and she could feel him gathering courage. "I want to give you children if you want them. Real children, not just the idea of them someday. I want to build a family with you, Delilah. I want to fill this house with love and noise and life." Delilah felt her eyes sting with happy tears. "I want that too, very much." "Then let us start trying," Xavier said softly. "Let us build the future we both dreamed of." And so they did, with intention and hope and considerable enthusiasm. Winter faded into spring, the valley turning green again, new calves being born in the pastures. Delilah tended a vegetable garden she planted near the house, growing food that would help see them through the next winter. The herd grew, the ranch prospered, and their love deepened with each passing day. In late May, Delilah realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be sure, then told Xavier one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I think I am with child," she said quietly. Xavier turned to her so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor confirming it." "But all the signs are there." Xavier's whoop of joy probably scared every animal within a mile, but Delilah did not care because he had pulled her into his arms and was spinning her around, laughing with pure delight. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly when he finally set her down. "You and me, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Delilah asked, though she could see the answer on his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Xavier said. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything, Delilah. A home, a purpose, love, and now a family. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Delilah said, covering his hand with hers. "You saved me, Xavier. You gave me a reason to hope again when I thought hope was dead. You are the best man I have ever known." They stood together on the porch as the sky blazed orange and purple, and the first stars began to appear. Their hands linked over the new life growing between them, and Delilah thought about the terrified, abandoned girl she had been less than a year ago. That girl felt like a stranger now. She had been transformed by this place, by this man, by the love they had built from the most practical of beginnings. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Xavier was absurdly overprotective, trying to prevent Delilah from doing any work that seemed remotely strenuous. She had to firmly establish that she was pregnant, not ill, and could still handle most of her usual tasks. They made the trip to Winnemucca to see the doctor, who confirmed the pregnancy and said everything looked healthy. The baby would likely come in January or early February, he estimated. Mrs. Henderson was delighted by the news and immediately began collecting baby items, enlisting other women in town to help. A quilting bee produced a beautiful crib quilt in shades of yellow and green. Someone donated a wooden cradle that had been in their family for years. The community, Delilah realized, had embraced her as one of their own, and the kindness moved her deeply. As autumn arrived again, Delilah's belly grew round and prominent. Xavier loved to place his hands on it and feel the baby kick, his face lighting up with wonder every time. They debated names endlessly, unable to settle on anything, deciding they would wait and see what felt right when the baby arrived. "I hope the baby has your eyes," Delilah said one evening, studying Xavier's face in the lamplight. "I hope the baby has your kindness," Xavier countered. "And your strength. You are the strongest person I have ever known. Me, I am not strong, you are the strong one." "Physical strength is easy," Xavier said seriously. "What you did, starting over in a strange place with nothing, building a life from scratch, that takes real courage. You amaze me every day." Winter came early that year, snow falling in November and never really letting up. By January, Delilah was large and uncomfortable, ready for the pregnancy to be over. Xavier barely left her side, worried that labor would start when he was too far away to help. It began on a cold February morning, Delilah waking to sharp pains that she immediately recognized. "Xavier, it is time." Xavier had never moved so fast in his life, helping her to the bed they had prepared, sending one of the ranch hands they had hired that fall racing into town for the doctor, and Mrs. Henderson. Then he sat with Delilah, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool water, murmuring encouragement as the contractions grew stronger and closer together. The doctor arrived within a few hours, Mrs. Henderson right behind him, and they took over with professional efficiency. But Delilah would not let go of Xavier's hand, needing him there, needing his strength to get through the pain and fear of childbirth. Labor lasted through the day and into the evening, and there were moments when Delilah was certain she could not continue, that it was too much. But Xavier was there, his voice steady and sure, telling her she could do it, that she was doing it, that he loved her and believed in her. Finally, as the sun was setting, their son was born, coming into the world with a lusty cry that made everyone laugh with relief. The doctor cleaned him up and placed him in Delilah's arms, and she stared down at the tiny, red-faced creature with absolute wonder. "He is perfect," she whispered. Xavier was crying openly, looking at their son with an expression of such love and awe that it made Delilah's heart overflow. "He really is. He is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen besides his mother." "Have you decided on a name?" Mrs. Henderson asked, beaming at them. Xavier and Delilah looked at each other, and Delilah saw the same thought in her husband's eyes that was in her own heart. "Robert," she said. "His name is Robert, after the man who brought us together." "Robert Donovan," Xavier agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Bob would have been honored. Little Robert was a healthy baby with a good set of lungs and his father's blue eyes. He transformed their lives completely, filling the house with the noise and chaos Xavier had wished for. Those first months were exhausting, learning to care for an infant while still managing the ranch. But they navigated it together, taking turns with the nighttime feedings, supporting each other through the challenging moments. As spring returned, bringing new life to the valley, Delilah would sit on the porch with Robert in her arms, watching Xavier work with the horses or mend a fence, and marvel at the life she had built. 2 years ago, she had been sitting on a bench at a train station, abandoned and hopeless, certain her life was over. Now she had a husband she loved deeply, a son she adored, a home that was truly hers, and a future full of promise. Xavier would catch her eye across the yard and smile, that special smile he reserved just for her, and she would smile back, their love a tangible thing that connected them even across distance. He would finish his work and come to the porch, dropping a kiss on her head and then Robert's, settling beside them to watch the sunset paint the valley gold. "Happy?" he would ask, though he must have known the answer. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she would reply, and it was the absolute truth. Robert grew quickly, as babies do, transforming from a helpless newborn into a chubby, curious toddler who kept them both on their toes. He took his first steps in the main room of the house, stumbling from his mother to his father with a look of pure triumph on his face. He said, "Da," first, then, "Ma," then began chattering constantly in his own private language that sometimes seemed to include actual words. When Robert was 2, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again, and their joy was even greater this time, knowing what to expect, excited to give Robert a sibling. Their daughter, Grace, was born in the autumn of 1885, an easier birth than Robert's had been, perhaps because Delilah knew better what to expect. Grace was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with solemn gray eyes that reminded Xavier of his mother. "She is going to be wise, this one," he said, holding his daughter with careful reverence. "You can see it already." The years flowed by like water, each one bringing changes and growth. The ranch prospered as they worked side by side, expanding their holdings, building a reputation for quality cattle and honest dealings. Robert grew into a sturdy boy who loved following his father around, learning everything he could about ranching. Grace was more reserved but whip-smart, reading by the age of 4, fascinated by everything from plants to numbers to the stories her mother told. More children came, though not as many as some families had. William arrived in 1888, a rambunctious boy who seemed determined to give his parents gray hair with his daring. Then Clara in 1891, sweet and gentle, who loved helping her mother in the garden. 4 children, Xavier and Delilah agreed, felt right. Their family felt complete. The house expanded along with the family, Xavier adding rooms with the help of hired hands and neighbors. What had been a modest bachelor's cabin became a real family home, with bedrooms for all the children, a proper dining room, even a small library where Delilah kept books and taught the children their letters and numbers. Through all the years, through all the challenges that came with raising a family and running a ranch, Xavier and Delilah's love never wavered. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when they could, sitting together on the porch after the children were asleep, talking and dreaming and simply being together. "You remember the day we met?" Delilah asked one evening, sitting beside Xavier on that same porch where they had spent so many hours. She was in her 40s now, threads of silver in her hair, lines around her eyes from years of smiling and squinting in the bright Nevada sun. But Xavier still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. "I will never forget it," Xavier said. "You were sitting on that bench in your ruined wedding dress, looking so lost and brave at the same time. I knew immediately that you were special, that you were strong. I just did not know yet that you would become my whole world." "I thought you were crazy proposing marriage like that," Delilah admitted, laughing. "But I was desperate enough to say yes. Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Xavier corrected. "The best decision you made was not leaving, was staying and building this life with me even when it was hard." "It was never that hard," Delilah said softly. "Not with you beside me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the yard in the last light of day. Robert was 18 now, tall and strong, already talking about starting his own ranch someday. Grace was 15, beautiful and brilliant, planning to become a teacher. William was 13 and still wild, but showing signs of settling down. Clara was just 9, still young enough to believe in magic. "We did well," Xavier said, gesturing to the scene before them, the thriving ranch, the happy children, the life they had built from nothing. "We did very well," Delilah agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. As the years continued to pass, the children grew and left to build their own lives, though none went far. Robert did start his own ranch, just a few valleys over, and married a nice girl from Winnemucca named Sarah. Grace became a teacher as she had planned, educating the children of the region and eventually marrying a banker who adored her. William surprised everyone by becoming a veterinarian, his wildness transforming into a passion for healing animals. Clara married a rancher's son and settled close by, giving Xavier and Delilah their first grandchildren before Robert and Sarah did. The ranch continued to prosper under Xavier's management, though he slowly turned more of the day-to-day operations over to the younger men they employed. He was in his 60s now, still strong but feeling his age, especially in the mornings when old injuries made themselves known. Delilah's hands were arthritic, her sewing days long behind her, but she still managed the house and garden with the help of Clara's oldest daughter, who came to stay with them during the summers. They would sit together on the porch most evenings, that same porch where they had spent so many hours over the decades, watching the sun set over their valley. The ranch had changed over the years, grown and modernized, but the land itself remained constant, beautiful and harsh and home. "No regrets?" Xavier would ask sometimes, a familiar refrain. "Not a single one," Delilah would always answer, and she meant it. She thought sometimes about the abandoned bride she had been, waiting on that bench for a man who would never come. She should probably thank Robert Sullivan, wherever his spirit was, for dying when he did. If he had lived, she would have married him and had some other life, probably a perfectly fine life, but it would not have been this life. It would not have been Xavier. Sometimes late at night, when she could not sleep, Delilah would lie beside her husband and listen to him breathe, marveling that she got to keep him, that they had built this extraordinary life together from the most unlikely beginning. She would remember that moment when he first spoke to her at the station, when he said he had been searching for her, and she would think how true that had turned out to be. Not searching in the literal sense, but in the deeper sense that they had been meant to find each other, that their lives had been steering toward that meeting all along. "I love you," she would whisper into the darkness, and Xavier, even in sleep, would reach for her hand and hold it tight. On a warm evening in the summer of 1912, as the sun set over the ranch in shades of gold and amber, Xavier and Delilah sat on their porch surrounded by their children and grandchildren. It was Robert's birthday, and the whole family had gathered to celebrate. There was food and laughter and music, the next generation of Donovans running and playing in the yard where their parents had once played. Xavier, now 77 and silver-haired but still sharp-eyed and strong-spirited, stood with some difficulty and raised his glass. The crowd quieted, turning to listen. 50 years ago," Xavier said, his voice still carrying authority despite his age, "I walked up to a woman I did not know and said something crazy. I proposed marriage to her after talking for maybe 5 minutes. It was the most impulsive, irrational thing I had ever done." He paused, looking at Delilah with so much love that several of the grandchildren sighed romantically. "It was also the smartest thing I ever did. Delilah, you have been my partner, my love, my reason for everything good in my life. You took a chance on a cowboy you did not know, and you built this family, this legacy, with your own hands and heart. I love you more today than I did 50 years ago, and that is saying something, because I loved you pretty fiercely even then." Delilah was crying openly, as were several of their children. She stood, though her knees protested, and took Xavier's hand. "You saved me," she said simply. "You gave me a life worth living and a love worth having. Everything good in my life started the day you found me at that station." Their children and grandchildren applauded and cheered, and Grace called out, "Tell us the story again. Tell us how you met." So they did, as they had done countless times over the years, telling the story of the abandoned bride and the cowboy who searched for her, how a marriage of convenience became a love story for the ages. The grandchildren listened with rapt attention, as if hearing it for the first time, even though they all knew it by heart. As the party continued around them, Xavier and Delilah sat close together, hands intertwined, watching their legacy play out before them. 4 children, 12 grandchildren so far, and a ranch that would continue on after they were gone. They had built something lasting from nothing, had created love and family and home in this harsh, beautiful land. No regrets. Xavier asked one more time, his voice barely audible under the noise of the celebration. "Not a single one," Delilah answered, squeezing his hand. "Not even the 3 days on that bench, because they led me to you." "I would have waited longer," Xavier said. "If I had known you were there, I would have come sooner." "You came exactly when you were supposed to," Delilah said firmly. Everything happened exactly as it should have. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit, as the party stretched on into the night with music and dancing and joy, Xavier and Delilah remained on their porch, watching over their family. They had lived a full life together, rich in love and meaning, and though they knew their time was growing shorter, they faced it without fear. They had each other, they had built something beautiful, and that was more than most people could say. Xavier pulled Delilah close, pressing a kiss to her temple as he had done thousands of times before. "Thank you," he whispered, "for saying yes to a crazy cowboy with a half-baked plan." "Thank you for asking," Delilah whispered back, "for seeing something in me worth saving." "Worth everything," Xavier corrected. "You were worth everything, and you still are." They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, brilliant in the clear Nevada sky. Around them, their family laughed and celebrated, secure in the love that had built this legacy. And Delilah thought about fate and chance, and the strange paths that led people to exactly where they needed to be. She had boarded a train in Philadelphia as a desperate, abandoned woman with no future. She had sat on a bench for 3 days in the hot Nevada sun, waiting for a man who would never come. And then a different man had appeared, had said he had been searching for her, and everything had changed. The life she thought was ending had actually been just beginning. It had been 30 years since they sat on this porch as newlyweds, awkward and uncertain, trying to figure out how to be married to strangers. Now they were old and comfortable, their love worn smooth like river stones, made more beautiful by time and use. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, had nursed sick children and buried parents, had celebrated births and weddings and all the small victories that made up a life. Through it all, they had held onto each other, their love the constant in a changing world. The party eventually wound down, the grandchildren put to bed in various rooms of the expanded house, the adult children heading to their own homes or to the bunkhouse where they had arranged to stay. Finally, it was just Xavier and Delilah again on the porch, as it had been so many nights before. "Ready for bed?" Xavier asked, standing with a grunt and offering her his hand. "Always," Delilah said, taking his hand and letting him help her up. They walked inside together, through the house they had built, past the photographs on the walls documenting 50 years of marriage and family. They got ready for bed with the comfortable routine of people who had shared this ritual for decades, and when they finally lay down together in the darkness, Delilah curled against Xavier's side as naturally as breathing. "I love you," Xavier murmured into her hair. "I love you too," Delilah responded. "Today, tomorrow, forever." "Forever," Xavier agreed, and as they drifted off to sleep, hands clasped together under the worn quilt, they were content. They had lived a love story that started with abandonment and desperation, but had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. They had found each other in the most unlikely way, in the most unlikely place, and they had made it work through sheer determination and love. The ranch would continue after they were gone, passed down to their children and grandchildren, a legacy built on the foundation of a marriage that began with convenience and became the greatest love either of them had ever known. The valley would remain beautiful, harsh and forgiving in turns, nurturing future generations of Donovans as it had nurtured them. And somewhere in the cosmos, perhaps Robert Sullivan was smiling, knowing that his death had inadvertently brought together two souls who were meant for each other, that his ranch had become the foundation for a love story that would be told and retold through the generations, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. Delilah Foster, who became Delilah Donovan on a hasty morning in Winnemucca, Nevada, had been abandoned by one man and found by another. She had waited 3 days on a hard bench, her dreams crumbling around her, never knowing that those 3 days were not the end of her story, but the beginning. That a cowboy would appear and say he had been searching for her, and those words would prove more true than either of them could have imagined. They had been searching for each other, really, through all the years before they met. Two lonely souls in a hard land, looking for home, for love, for meaning. And they had found it all in each other, building a life that was richer and more beautiful than any fairy tale. As the moon rose over the ranch and silence settled over the valley, Xavier and Delilah slept peacefully, their hands still joined, their hearts still beating in sync after 50 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys, as all tomorrows did. But they would face it together, as they had faced everything together since that August day in 1882, when Xavier walked up to a woman in a ruined wedding dress and changed both their lives forever. The abandoned bride had found her home. The searching cowboy had found his heart. And together, they had built an empire of love in the wild Nevada desert, proving that sometimes the best love stories start in the most unexpected ways, and that true partnership can transform convenience into destiny, strangers into soulmates, and a hard land into heaven. Their story would live on long after they were gone, told and retold around dinner tables and on porch swings. A family legend that reminded future Donovans that love could be found in the most unlikely places, that courage and commitment could build something lasting, and that sometimes, when you think all is lost, the universe is actually setting you up for the greatest gift of your life. Xavier and Delilah Donovan had lived that gift fully, cherishing every moment, building something beautiful from the ashes of despair. And if you listened carefully on quiet Nevada nights, you could almost hear their laughter echoing across the valley, their love story woven into the very land itself, eternal as the mountains and enduring as the stars.